Alright guys, so today we are going to talk mainly about let me get my pen here. We're going to talk about the trustee period of Georgia's colonial history. Okay, we're going to talk about the trustees, and then we're going to talk about a couple of groups, the Salzburgers and the Highland Scots, and then the malcontents. Okay. The trustee period, if you'll remember, was supposed to last 21 years. Basically, guys, the King of England and James Oglethorpe had decided that this was going to be a time period where they were just going to kind of trust Oglethorpe and his men to get things done. The trustee period, actually, guys, did not turn out so well. Okay, if you'll remember, they were supposed to be growing mulberry trees for silkworm, grapes for wine, and then they were supposed to have indigo. Of course, we all know that the charity part of everything didn't happen, but the economics part of things also wasn't happening very well. Believe it or not, they grew mulberry trees, but they grew the wrong mulberry trees. Therefore, the silkworms were not attracted like they had hoped, and they could not produce silk. The wine did not take off like they had thought. The grapes for the vineyards did not take off. So basically, guys, you have a colony that they're just not doing so hot. As far as the defense part of things, that proves to be pretty vital, which we'll talk later when we start talking about the Spanish threat from Florida. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into talking about a couple of different people, groups of people. The first would be the Salzburgers. Alright. Basically, guys, the Salzburgers, they were actually German-speaking Protestants. And if you'll remember, there was a whole issue with Protestants and Catholics. So basically, the Catholics and the Protestants just aren't getting along very well still in many different countries over in Europe. And so the Salzburgers made a plea to the King of England, King George II, who was actually a German Protestant. And so he told them to go on over to the colony of Georgia. They got there, and Oglethorpe was happy to have them, and he allowed them to settle a piece of land called Ebenezer. And that was what it translated out into was the Rock of Help. Okay. Now, they came just shortly right after the colony of Georgia was founded. And so they go into Ebenezer, and they realized that it was very marshy. This land was just very marshy, very swampy. And if you'll think back and you think about, mosquitoes love marshy areas. Okay, it was also in South Georgia, so of course it's very hot and humid. Because of this, there ends up being lots of the Salzburgers who end up dying before they can do a whole lot of anything. They then went and they asked, they said, we're not trying to complain, but we need somewhere else that we can actually grow food and the land's literally not killing us. So they got a new area and they established it, and they got real good with their name, and they called it the New Ebenezer. Okay. Now in this area, they actually proved to be really good workers. This is the one group of people that seems to figure out how to grow silk, or how to attract the silkworm with the right mulberry trees to actually produce silk. So they actually were very vital. They also established the Lutheran Church in Georgia, and it's another Protestant church. It's kind of like you have your Baptist and your Methodist, but these guys were Lutheran. They actually have one of the oldest Lutheran churches in the United States that was established there, and I think it was like 1763, I believe. They also established the first Sunday school and an orphanage. All of this was very important because it allowed more people to come into the area, and they were just very successful at what they did. They were very hard workers. But one thing they did not agree with was they did not agree with slavery, but then they also didn't agree with rum, which was the liquor that was not allowed in the trustee period. 1 year before the trustee period is set to end, there's a lot of turmoil going on. Georgia's people are unhappy, and through all of that, the Salzburgers remained very close to the trustees, and they were very loyal to the trustees, and so they remained very anti-slavery and very anti-rum. But they have people that are still around today. This is a 250-year-old culture, guys, that is still present in South Georgia. So, but that's the Salzburgers. Okay, Salzburgers were German-speaking Protestants. The next group were the Highland Scots. Okay, Highland Scots, it's all in the name, guys. They came from Scotland. So they came from Scotland, and they actually came again very shortly after the Salzburgers came. And believe it or not, Oglethorpe actually sought out the Highland Scots. The Highland Scots were very good fighters. They were fierce fighters. And so we needed to really protect ourselves from Florida, or from Spanish-held Florida. And so Oglethorpe sought the Scots out and actually brought them here. He gave them some land that was called Darien, or they called Darien. They brought their own church, which was the Presbyterian Church. They too were very anti-slavery, okay? But they were very different than the Salzburgers, especially since they were very fierce fighters. They came in, they worked, they did the things that they needed to, but they proved to be very beneficial when we ended up actually basically kind of fighting it out with Spain at one point in St. Simon's. There was actually this big battle. It's called the Battle of Bloody Marsh. Now, while it was a big battle, it was not very bloody, but whatever. And they ended up defeating the Spanish, which ultimately led to the Spanish leaving Florida. Because of this, we were able to, live in peace at that point. So the Highland Scots were very fierce fighters, okay? They too were very religious, hence why they brought the Presbyterian Church. And believe it or not, there's a county in South Georgia called McIntosh County. And it was actually named in honor of the Scots that came to Georgia to help fight during the Battle of Bloody Marsh. Okay? And then last but certainly not least, guys, the one group... Oh, sorry, guys. This is where New Ebenezer was, and this is where Darien was located. Okay? Still right in the middle of where everybody was settled. Okay? But two definitely good groups of people who also helped to change our culture as well. Okay? Now on to another group. This is the third and final group that we'll talk about. But these were the malcontents. Alright? If you break down this word, malcontents, well, if you're content with something, that means you're happy. But when you throw those three little letters, mal, in front of it, it is not a good thing at all. Okay? So basically, guys, what starts happening is the economy of Georgia was not taking off like they had hoped. Like I said earlier, wine wasn't doing great. Silk wasn't doing great. Okay? And so they ended up looking around to the other colonies, especially South Carolina. And they started to see exactly how successful these colonies were. Well, South Carolina was growing tobacco, but they also had the use of slave labor. And the malcontents were getting really angry because they said, what's the point? We're not allowed to use slavery. We're not allowed to drink rum. And look how unsuccessful we've been. And so they started bringing this stuff up with Oglethorpe. And Oglethorpe and the trustees just did not want to hear it. Actually, in 1743, Oglethorpe finally leaves the colony of Georgia, and he does not return. And so he basically rules through the few trustees that were left over there. Okay. Well, if the Charter of 1732 was signed, and it said that the trustee period was supposed to last for 21 years, that would have meant by 1753, the trustee period was supposed to be over with in anyway. Well, in 1751, the malcontents were so adamant about this whole slavery issue that they ended up allowing them to bring in slaves. Okay, a lot of the malcontents had already started to leave, which obviously was leaving Georgia just high and dry without people there to do the things that they needed to make the colony so successful. So they started to leave, and so the trustees were like, whatever, here, have it. You can have slaves, you can have your liquor, and you just, whatever, we're done. Okay? So because of the malcontents, Georgia is now allowed to have slavery, and they're allowed to have liquor. What also ends up happening is you start to see more people obtaining land. Okay? Land was a big deal. The more land you had, the more powerful and wealthy you were. And that was something that people wanted back then. Okay? Now you have the Spanish threat. Okay? So what's the big deal with the Spanish threat? Well, Spain wants to take back over some of the land, and England wants Florida. Okay? And so there's this big war called the War of Jenkins' Ear. Basically what happens was the Spanish captured a British naval officer, and then in the process of everything, they cut his ear off. Hence the War of Jenkins' Ear. Poor Jenkins didn't have an ear anymore, so they went to war over it. The fighting was truly done far away from us, okay? But because the Spanish held Florida and English held Georgia, they were very close in proximity. And so the Spanish began to start trying to attack English colonists. And so Georgia started fighting it off, okay? Basically, guys, what ends up happening is they end up meeting in St. Simon's, and because of the Highland Scots, we were able to defeat the Spanish. There was a whole thing about they captured somebody, and the captured person had a letter on them that said that basically the English was sending over all of these big warships, and so they kind of got scared. Now, was that going to happen? No, but it was able to throw the Spanish off enough to where they were like, deuces, gee, we're done. We're not fighting with you anymore. And that actually led to the Spanish moving further south, which ultimately, in years to come, they end up leaving Florida altogether. Okay, but the Battle of Bloody Marsh was just a battle in this big war of Jenkins' Ear. But the little bit of effect it had on us was the fact that we did prove that we were going to defend the other colonies from the Spanish threat. Okay. Basically, this is what you're looking at. Here you have Spain. Here you have Georgia, which was held by England. And they wanted their land back, and England said, nope, sorry about your luck, dude. Okay. Here's the site of where it happened. Obviously, this is a very marshy area. What blood was shed turned the marsh red, hence the name, the Battle of Bloody Marsh. Okay. Now, at this point, 1752 rolls around, and at that point, Georgia ends its trustee period 1 year early, so it only remains a trustee colony for 20 years. At that point, guys, Georgia is a royal colony. Okay, it was very different than a trustee colony. Royal colony means that you are ruled by a royal governor. They're not trustees. It's just one man who obviously is going to be appointed by none other than the king himself. Okay, Georgia as a royal colony is very different than Georgia as a trustee colony. But this is where we are going to stop, and we will pick up on it tomorrow. All right? All right, guys, if you'll go to your Google Classroom, there will be assignments for you in there. And, yeah, so that's about it. All right, deuces, G's.